I'm here with Sian today, and we are going to talk a little bit about handstand, which can often feel like you're sort of flying. It can be very freeing and exhilarating. And for those of us who struggle with it, it can also be very frustrating. So hopefully we'll go through a bunch of things that could be stopping you, and then also ways to refine it so that maybe if you already have handstand, you can up the ante a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about some things that might stop us from getting into it. So if you have tight shoulders, which if you're not sure if your shoulders are tight, when you lift your arms up, if your front ribs puff or the arms bend, that means your shoulders are tight, right? So we want to be able to pull the front ribs and the frontal hip bones towards each other, and then without losing that, try to get the arm back by the ears, right? So when you're in handstand, obviously we want our arms and ears lined up. If someone has tighter shoulders, their hands are going to be closer or further away from their ears, or they're going to be bent. So when you're trying to figure out what is stopping you, tight shoulders is very often a big obstacle to overcome. The other thing that can be very tricky is just the mechanics of getting into it. So personally, and I know many of my yogi friends feel like plank is much harder than handstand once you're in there. The problem is the mechanics of trying to get into it, which is often fear. So tight shoulders and mechanics can be two things that are obstacles of getting into your handstand. So Sian's going to use the strap because she has tighter shoulders. She knows this. So she uses the strap. It's measured shoulders distance. And when you use the strap, it goes just above your elbow, because if you have it higher, you can still bend your elbows. And one reason that people fall is because their arms bend, and that just creates more fear. And then I find that if you're newer to it, you want your hands about 5 or 6 inches away from the wall. And just like every down dog we do, we want to check our hands to make sure that the hands are not turning in. Whenever the hands turn in, that causes that internal rotation in our shoulder, and when we're weight bearing, it's not a good idea. All right, so she can start in down dog. And then she's going to step one foot in just a little bit. So if you step your foot too close, it can be really hard to get that sense of lift. So you don't want to step your foot up to your wrist, or it's going to be way harder. And then she's going to lift her other leg. When you lift this leg, if your whole hip turns out or the leg isn't active, it's going to be, again, harder to get into the pose. So this leg is straight and strong. You can tell it's straight and strong because she's rooting through her big toe mound. And then she's just going to take a couple of hops. So she can bend her left leg, push through the ball of the foot, and then land. And you can also notice when she's landing, she's bending that leg so she's not going to jar the low back or slam the foot. You can come back down to down dog. Okay, so those little hops are what sort of give us the sense of whether we're ready to come into our handstand. So if you're landing with a thud or you're not feeling any sense of lightness when you take those hops, then maybe it's time to work more on some dolphin plank or some other poses that are going to build some more body awareness. So once you feel like the hops are coming more steadily, then maybe you're going to lift up all the way up. So we'll start again, coming back into your down dog. And then typically whichever leg is stronger, if you're newer to it, you want to step that foot in, lift the other leg up nice and high so you're as close to the wall as you can be, and then you bend your leg on the floor, push through the ball of the foot, and lift up. Right? So Sian is a teacher. She's been practicing for years, decades maybe. So she made it look really easy. It is not that easy. And then she's reaching up through the big toe mounds. She's pushing into her hands. She's trying to find Tadasana flipped over. And whenever you want to come down, Sian, you can come down. Right? When you do come down, see how beautifully she came down? It's one foot and then the other. So you don't want to land both feet at the same time, unless, of course, that's what you're working on as a more advanced variation. And the last one that we're going to work on today is 2 feet at the same time. And for most people, this creates the most fear and the lack of proprioception, or where the body is in space, so the mechanics become that much more challenging. And so when I try to teach it, I tend to tell people, think less about lifting your feet and more about using your legs, the strength of our legs, to get your hips over your shoulders. And so if the hips go over the shoulders, the feet and the legs have to follow. So when you're ready, you can come back into your down dog. And then again, you can step your feet in. So for me, I don't like to step them in too close. I know some of my friends like to step them a little bit closer in this one, so you'll sort of figure out what your spacing is. And then when you're ready, you can bend your knees, and you're using the strength of your legs to lift up. Beautiful. Right? And then if you're taller, I'm taller, I feel like I can find my center of gravity here because I'm a little bit shorter, and then I just have to lift my legs up. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. Oh, beautiful. And then again, she comes down with control. You can come to child's pose, Sian. Okay. And then the last little thing I wanted to go over, so if you are interested in the benefits of handstand, but you know that either because of an injury or physical limitations, it's never going to happen for you, you could still come into the basic shape without having to lift both legs up. So one way to do that is to come into a down dog. So we'll do the down dog split first. You can use your strap if you would like. She loves her strap. Okay, and then you step 1 foot up the wall. And so Sian has a lot more mobility than most people, so she's pretty close to the wall. If you're tighter, you can move your hands further away, and then your leg doesn't have to go up quite so high. But you can see from her foot down to her hands, she's pretty much in handstand. She just doesn't have to lift that other leg up. And there's nothing easy about this, right? You're still working the same actions in the arm where the triceps are firming in, you're rooting through the fingertips, the mound of the index finger, the foot at the wall, you're really pushing through the big toe mound. The leg is straight, and then we want to make sure that the left hip doesn't sink. Right? So you could hold this for 5 to 10 breaths or longer if you would like, and then we'll switch sides. Okay, so that's one variation. And then another one is handstand prep, so you can lower your knees. And if we're going to take the prep version, we want to measure our legs distance away, which for some people works and for some people it does not. So she's going to take her feet to the baseboard, and then she's going to slide the strap underneath her sit bone. So that's giving her her legs distance. And then Sian, can you lift your arms up overhead for a second? So this is the shape we're going to come into, but with flipped over. Yes, so you can take your arms down. So for many people, it's really hard to come into that box shape that Sian was just in if you have the tight shoulders or if you have tight hamstrings. So if you have tight shoulders, very slowly you can inch your hands forward like 1/2 inch at a time, because remember in yoga 1/2 inch is a mile. Or if your hamstrings are tight, you can lift them up the wall just a little bit. So we're striving for that box shape, but we don't want to not be able to do the pose just because we have tight shoulders or tight hamstrings. So if you're using the strap, you're going to take the heel of the hand to the strap, and then the heels of the feet come up the baseboard. So you're in a pretty short down dog. And then you can step 1 foot up about hip height, and then we press into that foot to lift the other leg, and you can pause with both legs bent. So this would be one way to practice it if you have tighter hamstrings. Eventually you want to try to move the legs towards straight, and Sian has the hamstring mobility or openness to come into this box shape. If you were tighter, you could walk your feet up a little higher. So we work in stages when we come into these poses. We're not expected to hop right into our handstand right away, unless, of course, you're a 16-year-old gymnast who could just walk on your mat and do that without thinking. Right? The yoga is not the pose. It's the persistent and diligent effort toward that pose. It's noticing the thoughts that surround the pose and how we react to it. And then, of course, when we're in the pose or when we're practicing it, we get that benefit of the mind just being completely focused, of that ekagrata or total absorption, so we can kind of forget about all of the other stuff going on. So I think once we can take the emphasis off of actually getting into the pose, then maybe the pose comes more easily because there's less attachment to it. Of course, that's not always true, but that's what I like to tell people. So hopefully that was helpful.